Chapter 6, Key Issue 3, it's about religions organizing space and the distinct patterns found within religions. So we'll look at the roles of the places of worship in different religions. We'll talk about why places are sacred and universalizing religions. We'll look at the importance of physical geography to ethnic religions. We'll talk about how the landscape is used in religiously significant ways. And we can compare the calendars and holidays of ethnic and universalizing religions, as well as the organization of a religion. So the idea of sacred space. Sacred space is something that really reflects the impact of the landscape made by our religion. So more traditionally, or at least maybe less traditionally, but the way we usually think of sacred space would be tied to a structure that anchors the religion to the landscape. So in Christianity is the church. The Christian church has a significant role because of the belief that the church building itself, is the house of God. And so traditionally in a town, the church would be the largest and tallest building in a community. Traditionally, it also would have been placed in a prominent location, so the square or the center of a town. And there's no single architectural style because it's changed over time. So we had, cathedrals, and then we have churches. When we moved from Catholicism to Protestantism, the architectural style changed. And so the styles of churches change over time, and depending on the prominence of the community. In Baha'i, the houses of worship are dispersed to different continents, and they are open to all adherents of all religion. And so a Baha'i house of worship is open to everyone. It's not the house of just their God. And it's organized much more like a place for studying than worshiping. A Muslim mosque is treated as a space for community assembly, although churches are often viewed that way too. But the mosque itself is not viewed as a sanctified space. So the mosque itself isn't seen as the house of Muhammad. Attention to the cardinal directions is emphasized. So the pulpit at the end of the courtyard faces Mecca. And the distinctive feature is usually the minaret, a tower where a man summons people to worship. In Buddhism, pagodas are the most common religious building. They are prominent and ornate elements. They're on landscapes. They usually have tall, many-sided towers that are arranged in a series of tiers and balconies and slanting roofs. And they often contain relics that are believed to be a portion of Buddha's body or clothing. They're not designed for congregational worship, so they're designed for independent meditation or prayer. This is one of the oldest Buddhist pagodas in the world. It's in India. So in universalizing religion, sacred spaces are usually associated with the founder's life. So they don't have to necessarily be next to each other, and they don't have to be related to any physical environment. But sacred spaces have to do with important events in the religion's founder's life or parts of their journey. So in both Buddhism and Islam, places that emphasize identifying shrines have to do with the location of important events in the life of Buddha or Muhammad. And in both cases, pilgrimages or journeys for religious purposes are incorporated, especially into Islam doctrine. So the idea of pilgrimage is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, that you should go on this pilgrimage once in your life if you are able. Here you can see some of the sacred spaces in Buddhism spread out between Nepal and India. And you can see that these shrines would be associated with Buddha ascending to heaven, returning to earth, Burden's sermon at Deer Park. Buddha attained nirvana here. Buddha attained enlightenment. And so these places mark important events in Buddha's life, and they're considered sacred. In Islam, the holiest locations are in cities associated with the Prophet Muhammad. So the holiest city is Mecca. It's the birthplace of Muhammad, and it now contains the holiest object in the Islamic landscape, the Al-Kaaba, a cube-like structure that's encased in silk, and it sits in the middle of Islam's largest mosque. The second most holy place is Medina, and that's where Muhammad's tomb is. There are places that are considered holy, I guess, or sacred in Christianity. But because the church is identified, the building itself is identified as the house of God, religious pilgrimages happen, but they aren't as prevalent in Christianity anymore. You might take them for your own reason or for your own spiritual journey, but it's not a part of your doctrine. Like it's not a requirement of your faith usually. And the location that you have your church isn't necessarily as important because every church is seen as a holy, sacred place, and that's different than in other religions. But we know that some of the most sacred places in Christianity would be in, like Bethlehem, Jerusalem. Why do we have sacred spaces in ethnic religions? In ethnic religions, they're more closely tied to the physical geography. So, like in Hinduism, you look at like Mount Kailash is holy because it's home to Shiva. The holiest places are riverbanks and coastlines. And so, like the Ganges River, which is one of the holiest rivers in India, you obtain purification by bathing in the holy river, the Ganges River, even though the Ganges River right now is filled with sewage. So it's actually a place where people become ill because they engage in this sacred ritual. They bathe in the Ganges River, and the Ganges River is polluted and filled with sewage, and so they get ill. But it's so deeply embedded in their faith that this is a way to achieve purification. Other examples of a place in the landscape might be Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is the remnant of a pagan structure, and many archaeologists believe that it is aligned to the sun rises between two stones on the summer solstice or the winter solstice. And so Stonehenge has a prominent place on the landscape because it reflects the movement of the sun during the solstice. Other spaces that are considered sacred in religions are places where you dispose of the dead. And there's many different reasons why you would dispose of the dead in different methods or in different places. So you look at the climate, the topography. Are you in the mountains? Are you near water? Are you in a flood zone? And religious doctrine, and they all combine together to create differences in your practices to shelter or bury the dead. So burials are performed most frequently by Christians, Muslims, and Jews. They typically bury the deceased in designated areas called cemeteries. And for many years, cemeteries were the only public place that were really open during, particularly in the 19th century. So when cities were really congested and crowded, cemeteries were really like a green space, like a park to go walking in. And if you go through most major cities now, you can still find some old cemeteries that are open like parks. Cremation is common in Hinduism. So they first wash the bodies of the deceased with water from the Ganges River, and then they burn the body with a slow fire on a funeral pyre. So here you see the funeral pyre being built. In Hinduism, white is the color of mourning. So here they're starting to build the pyre to burn the body, but when they come back, for the final ceremony, you would see many people dressed in white instead of black, the color of mourning in the United States. Why do we have religious settlements, and why do we name things after religions? So usually when you move to a new area, it serves an economic purpose. So people are more likely to settle along the banks of the river or the coast of a country. And we've kind of talked about this already when we looked at human distribution. But sometimes you have settlements that are established for religious reasons. We get a huge utopian movement for a long time in the United States. A utopian settlement is a community that's built around usually a religious way of life, and it's an ideal community. So this is what a community would look like in a perfect world. So, for example, during the utopia movement in the United States, Salt Lake City was built or settled by the Mormons. And Salt Lake City was an area where the Mormons would be free to practice their faith, and they were able to build a society the way they wanted it. Roman Catholic immigrants also give religious place names or toponyms. Remember, we talked about toponyms, a name for a place, and we talked about this a little bit in chapter 1. So if you look at the U.S. Southwest or Quebec, or even parts of the United States Northeast, you'll see areas where people, the names are named, like the places are named after like saints. So here you have, Saint Eugene or Saint Benoit or Saint Augustine. In California, you will have Los Angeles, San Francisco. Louisiana has a lot of saints for names as well. Interesting, Louisiana, which is, located at or below sea level, doesn't have as much burial as they have like above ground tombs where they intern the dead. So that's just the way physical geography connects that to our sacred space. And we also look at calendars different. So let's compare how ethnic religions and universalizing religions look at calendars differently. So in ethnic religion, holidays are aligned with natural events, and are usually associated with the physical geography of the homeland or the hearth where the religion began. So a prominent feature is celebration of the seasons. And so most of the religious holidays are tied to local agriculture, might be tied to, like, the solstice is a big event in most ethnic religions. So the summer solstice, the winter solstice. And so all of these events are tied to the religious calendar. In universalizing religions, the holidays are related to the events in the life of the founder, more than just one particular place. So Ramadan Islam is part of the 5 pillars of the faith, and so it's a major part of the Islamic faith. Or think about like Christianity. We have the resurrection of Jesus. That's Easter. That's a major holiday that's celebrated. Christmas is the birth of Jesus. And so the Christian calendar is arranged around the events in the life of its founder. Now, universalizing religions, because they're larger, they're more widespread, they're usually connected in some way to ensure that the faith is being practiced with consistency. So in hierarchical religions, like Christianity, there's usually a well-defined geographic structure and territories that are organized. There's usually like local administrative units. And so, for example, the Roman Catholic Church has administrative units on most of the world's ecumen, and each is headed by a leader who's accountable to the next higher ordered leader. And so, like, the highest authority aside from, God, the highest authority in the Roman Catholic Church on earth would be the Pope. And then you have the cardinals. And then locally, you would have, your bishops. Islam is a little different. There's no hierarchy necessarily, and each group is autonomous. So there's no formal territorial organization, so they don't break down different areas into miniature territories. To look at Catholicism here, you can see these red lines. So here is one province, and a province is led by an archbishop. Here's another province. Here you go, Illinois and Wisconsin are another province. And then within the province, you can see that they are broken down into smaller territories called a diocese. In the diocese, you would be headed by a bishop. This area right here, this area is headed by the archdiocese, and that's really an archbishop that's in charge, that's really located in the diocese. So this person right here would be in charge of the whole thing, this whole area here.